Okay. Yeah, left. Yeah, left libertarianism. Hey guys. Yeah, left libertarianism. Um, the thing about it is, economic liberty isn't really a thing that's really talked about in the Libertarian Party, and unfortunately, when you do talk about it, it's not anything the government does is bad. So we can't talk about universal daycare. We can't talk about free college or universal health care, like things that will actually help people out. Because to them, every right is the same. Like it's kind of like I was telling you earlier. It's like a religion to some degree. It's like sins. Every sin is the same, but I disagree. Like some sins are much worse than other sins. Like stealing a candy bar and raping somebody are totally two different things. So you can't distinguish two rights as the same. And to them, their right to a CEO's right to greed is more important than a homeless veteran's right to not starve and have
Well,
shelter.
I think what it is that there's a misunderstanding in exactly how we understand the difference between certain rights, certain privileges, or positive versus negative rights. There's rights and privileges, and there's positive and negative rights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, libertarians are huge champions of negative rights. You may not tell me that I don't have the right to say whatever I want, or I don't have the right to defend my body against a physical attack, or I don't have the right to refuse to quarter soldiers in my home. That's my property, my body, my thoughts, the content of my speech. Those are all negative rights because in order for you to have those rights infringed upon, somebody has to come and interfere with you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, for example, they'll say when leftists like to say, for example, we should have a right to health care. Well, a right to health care is a little bit fundamentally different than your right to freedom of speech, because your right to freedom of speech does not presume that somebody else has to provide you a platform with which to speak. Your right to freedom of speech doesn't mean CNN has to put you on the air. Your right to health care, however, means that a hospital or a doctor or a nurse or some sort of healthcare professional has to put their time and their energy and medical equipment maybe, or a prescription pharmaceutical medication maybe, some kind of medical intervention is going to be expended on the individual's behalf, and those things cost money. Now, does that mean that the person shouldn't have health care? I don't think so. I think that that's a cost that the state perhaps should burden. It would be more beneficial for the state or for a state agency to handle the cost of running a public insurance option so that you could get your health care at a private facility. Once again, we're specifically saying that we advocate, if we're advocating for a public health care option, that we advocate for something more closer to the French model rather than the British model.
Yeah, well,
But
The French model is what left libertarians advocate for,
yes,
because I think that's
this has to be expounded on.
um, I I don't want to say that this is because it's because it lowers the cost by trillions of dollars, because if we switch to universal healthcare, it's going to save us trillions of dollars, according to a university mass study. I mean, according to a Yale University study, it's going to save us $580 billion annually and
It'll
save 68,000 lives annually. And according to a Harvard study, 45,000 people die a year from healthcare,
it'll
from a
save
lack
us.
of healthcare coverage. I mean, should we argue that is it a right? No. What I want to argue for is the fact that it gives us more liberty, in the sense that, I mean, if you're dead, you don't have liberty.
Well, it makes a lot more sense for the government to expend money to make sure that people in their jurisdiction, their taxpayers have health care and can continue to live for longer and can continue to work for longer, that makes more sense as an investment from the government than the kinds of things that the government spends money on now. Now, you and I both well know that almost any city, any county, any state government, anywhere in the entire country is going to be absolutely riddled with corruption. I've yet to see one that isn't. And we could take the example of Buffalo for as just a single snapshot, but you could snapshot any city or any one of 3,000 counties throughout the entire 50 states and probably have a similar issue, at least somewhat. In the fact that our government spends so much money in Buffalo and in Erie County on what amounts to government waste. The government is extremely irresponsible. The police forces out here are extremely irresponsible. The Erie County lockup is notoriously bad, and yet at the same time, nobody is talking about spending money on cleaning up and fixing our police departments. We're not having that kind of discussion when it comes to our police departments because we're not allowed to have that kind of discussion. Right now, the left, as a result of seeing so many people who've been either somewhat justly or unjustly have been attacked or hurt or murdered in their altercations with police, they've said that now we need to defund the police because they've been so dangerous that we have to just completely get rid of them. That's, in my view, a huge overreaction to the problem.
We can't defund the police.
But that problem is not necessarily a police-specific issue. It's just manifested with violence because we've given the police the ability to exercise violence. But it comes from a core problem of the inability to hold police accountable as a relation of their function to the government. Now, the government itself is completely unaccountable. They take your money in the forms of taxes and fines and fees, but the way that they spend it, they're completely unaccountable to the public. That needs to change. That, in my opinion, is the core root of the problem of all of the corruption in all of the 3,000 counties and all of the cities within in the entire country. From top to bottom, we have wasteful projects, we have personal benefits, we have perverse police incentives, we have all kinds of things that we need to be addressing that we're not addressing. If we had addressed the issue of allowing people to have accountability for how their government spends money, we would see massive improvement. Right there, by itself. But we're not having that conversation. Another area where we should be having a conversation, we're talking about the massive wastes of money that certain programs are when we're talking about federal spending. We have a big war on terror that's been going on for 20 years. We have overseas conflicts that we're involved in. We have all kinds of foreign aid that we're spending and sending money out to all these countries around the world. We should probably look at cutting some of that spending and instead spending that money on things that make more sense to benefit the American people who are struggling. Like right now, when the government shuts down all of our economy and all of our industry and says that the bottom 50% of the economy may not work and may not go out and earn a living, it makes sense to argue for a UBI for all the people who were put out of work because the government has prevented them from earning work.
You have no choice.
By a point of a gun. And somehow you gotta make your fucking ends meet. And if you don't have Social Security or disability or something paying your bills right now, if you don't have your own small business operating off of the internet, or you don't have some kind of nest egg that you can fall back on, right now people are struggling to get by.
We can afford
it. And the narrative has been to demonize these people. For, you're against the lockdown, you want to kill grandma. No, people need to go out and make foods, or make money to buy food so grandma can eat.
Well, my mother's a nurse, and she told me that she wants everything to be open. We should just wear masks and social distance. That's what she said. And she's an LPN. So, you got
things should
experts.
be open. People have to be able to afford to fucking eat food.
But people are fear mongering. It's like, we need to still have our liberty, man. At the end of the day, like, this country was founded on individual liberty, and that's what American values are. We can't let fear override our freedom.
We
But
can't.
and as long
Not
as
for anything, especially not some dumb flu virus.
and as long as we can, as long as we can have these mass social distance and not harm anybody else, then there is no debate here. Like, we should be able to have our freedoms.
The narrative that is being pushed from the other side of that is that by simply by going out and participating in any kind of business anywhere, that you're raising the likelihood of spreading the virus, and as a result, you need to be stopped. And because we're not stopping and saying, well, if people can't afford to eat, if people can't afford to pay their rent, and they're being made homeless, they're gonna spread a lot more disease and a lot more germs if they're forced out onto the street because you don't allow people to go to fucking work.
I don't think, I think I told you this, but 26 million people are expected to be homeless next year. July, a third of people couldn't make their rent. This is why economic liberty.
We are getting ready to get hit with the biggest whammy since the Great Depression, and maybe even bigger.
That's why we need another FDR coming back, dude. Because honestly,
we don't have FDR right now.
This pandemic, this economic collapse has proven that social democracy is needed more than ever right now, and UBI would be a huge, huge, huge start.
It would be a good safety net to struggling people.
It's affordable, like. Especially with the land value tax that I was telling you about, we could generate $11 trillion in land value tax and get rid of most, if not all, taxes.
The problem
and afford what we're talking about here.
The problem with this is that we inevitably get into the boring, quote-unquote, conversation of economics. But economics is the conversation we always must have, because eventually everything needs to be paid for. Like I said, I advocated for universal health care earlier, but I didn't say that we don't need to worry about paying for it. We need to pay for it. It's just that in order to pay for it, we're going to have to cut costs in other areas. That's not going to happen unless we facilitate the ability for the people, the relevant taxpayers within each of the different jurisdictions around the country, to have some kind of executive support over how their money is spent. But right now, nobody has that. Even up here in Buffalo City Hall, you go up to fucking the Buffalo Common Council and you try to present some proposal or some idea, and they will, at the very least, they will politely tell you to piss off. I've had my experiences with the council. They're not what you would call the most open-minded and ready to fucking change things kind of people. They exist for the exact same kind of mentality that every other kind of government body exists for, maintain the status quo. And they're good at that, just the same way that every other government is good as that. But if you remove their agency to spend your money on their pet bullshit, then you have a lot more area to talk about what kinds of things we should be spending money on. Because right now there's too many people who will say we can't afford it. Well, right now we can't, because we're spending too much on entitlements for big businesses, entitlements for government unions. Certain government jobs get paid quite handsomely too.
Oh yeah,
government jobs really shouldn't be getting the kind of pay that they are. And at the same time, like, if we're talking about areas where government could cut, I'm a vet. I'll tell you straight up, there's one place you can cut. Cut the pay rate of officers, commissioned officers. 03 and above. If you're a captain, a major, a light colonel, a colonel, or a general, you're making right now, I don't know what the current pay scale is, but high-ranking officers make ridiculous amounts of money per month at their base pay, and then they get tons and tons of additional bonuses that go on depending on their career field. Commissioned officers make too much money. They make way too much money.
You know what you're saying is radical right now, and that a lot of right-wingers who hear this may get a little offended and say you don't really support the troops.
Mm-hmm. And I will tell them that that is a right-winger who has never actually put on a fucking real uniform. Because anybody who's ever actually served as a grunt and worn stripes on their fucking arm knows goddamn full well that officers enjoy way too much privilege and have way too much pay and have way too much respect that they don't fucking earn. Anybody who's ever been an enlisted person will tell you that straight up. And realistically, it breeds resentment among the enlisted corps, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. It does. I experienced it when I was enlisted, because I saw it. And I know that as a young, low-ranking airman, that I knew that the officers appointed over me, a lot of them were corrupt, and I resented them.
Shit.
I obeyed their orders, sure. But that's just one small area. And most military members are not commissioned officers. Most are enlisted. And enlisted people don't get paid enough. They scrape by most of the time.
Yeah.
But enlisted people are not the ones who need to be getting the pay cut. It's the commissioned officers. But once again, officers enjoy special government privileges.
We're going to cut a shit ton of stuff, Ed. We'll be able to implement what we're talking about here and be able to cut government massively. Both on the authoritarian level and on the economic level. I mean, we're talking about
making cuts like that involves actually getting somebody to be willing to relinquish that kind of power. I don't know.
Well, with the current government we have now, none of this is possible.
None.
We won't have this until the government fears us.
I agree. Well, at the very least, until the government starts respecting the people. Right now, the government we have clearly has nothing but deep disdain for the people.
Yeah, no, they don't care about us.
Not just that they don't care. Like, this is the thing, is that I would posit that the actual emotional feeling about the people from most officials of the government is insight.
Thank you.
It's not an active disinterest in not caring. It's not a passive disinterest, it's an active disdain. It's insight.
Thank you.
The problem is that a lot of these, like, for example, guys like Trump, they hear people complaining about the police brutality, and all a guy like Trump can think is, "Oh, don't be a criminal." But even if you were doing something wrong, you should be able to expect that the police can arrest you without killing you. Unless you start shooting at them, like, then they're gonna have to defend themselves. Like, at that point, you have to not be a moron.
Oh, man.
But once again, that's a side of it that the left won't hear, is you can't say, don't be a moron.
We gotta stop defending criminals, and we gotta stop, like, I mean, Rashard Brooks and Latrell Allen had it coming, guys. You can't take officers' tasers, and you can't shoot at police officers. That's crazy. What were they supposed to do? But the taser thing, like, people don't understand. Like, it's a 50-50 thing. Like, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes people die from it.
Yeah, there are dudes out there immune to tasers. There was that one dude who the fucking 2 or 3 cops shot him with a taser, and he looked at him and just basically laughed at him.
Yeah, exactly. People are
that's
immune.
That's gotta be pretty terrifying. Like, you put 50,000 volts in a dude, and he looks at you and says, what, bitch? Like, imagine being in that situation. You'd shit bricks.
If Rashard Brooks pointed the taser at them too. And
yeah, you can't take an officer's weapon and point it at him and expect to get out of that alive.
He used
but
it.
But at the same time, I don't think it's unfair for us to say that we should expect police in general to be better at de-escalation if they can. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. And you've got to defend your life just like anybody else. But in general, we should expect more de-escalation and more community policing. This is what we were talking about.
As far as defunding the police, we need to demilitarize the police.
Yes.
That's what That's when we're talking about defunding. Okay, I mean, we need massive criminal justice reform, less excessive force, community policing, non-profit policing.
But we also need simplification and truncation of the laws. If the police are expected to enforce the law, they have to be able to know it.
Police officers need to know the law, and they need to understand that they have a duty and an obligation to either enforce that law or ignore that law. That is what the Constitution says. So, right now they're being taught to just, hey, I'm the law enforcement. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think. The law is the law, and I need to enforce it, and that's bullshit. Thomas Jefferson said it himself. If a law is unjust, not only are you right to disobey it, you're obligated to, because if the government can't follow the law, why the fuck should we?
Well, here's the thing. If, say, for example, someone is arrested and, say they're charged with possession of weed, and you, as the hypothetical listener, are suddenly tasked with the interesting task of now being a juror on this person's trial. Because they said, I don't do anything wrong, I'm going to trial. They go to trial, and they said, yes, I smoked weed, I didn't do anything wrong. You should give me jury nullification and acquit me. Not because of me, but because this is unjust. It should never be allowed to happen to anyone, and we should stop it now.
Jury nullification.
Now, jury nullification is something that courts will actively go out of their way to interfere with, which is unconstitutional, but they do it anyway because they do not care.
But I think somebody in Georgia got jury nullified for that. I think they were growing pot plants and selling it, I believe, but don't quote me on it. But
I think you should be able to sell it.
The jury actually found him not guilty, despite it being illegal in that state. Mm-hmm. That's jury nullification.
But that's the thing, though, is like, even for libertarians, like, if I'm tasked with being a juror, and you have a dude who isn't, say, growing cannabis plants, but is instead, has a warehouse full of poppies that are scarred, I'm probably not going to nullify that guy. That guy's going to go away, and I'm not going to feel bad about that. Because when we're talking about something like heroin, when we're talking about something that is as deeply, truly dangerous, I think that individual communities, if they don't want that on their streets, they don't need to tolerate that. Heroin is something significantly different, and I do think that one of the problems that libertarians, in particular, run into is that when we talk about ending the war on drugs and ending the enforcement against all drugs, you've never had an experience with something like heroin. You've never seen someone who's addicted to it. You've never seen what they'll do to get it. And you don't know what you're dealing with. And when you just say, end the war on all drugs and legalize everything, there are people out there who are rational, regular people, who are not insane, who hear that and think we sound insane. It's because they have the experience with hardcore drugs like methamphetamines, or they've seen someone who's roid raged, or they've been the victim of some kind of violence associated with that kind of drug.
So I think we should just say we just simply don't want them to be put in jail.
I would rather say that individual communities should be left to those decisions. Like, it's going to be tough. And that's going to be one of those things that ultimately the legalization road to something like heroin is going to be a lot longer than something like weed. And rightly so. And should be. and it's something that should be discussed at more length. But we don't have that conversation right now because right now we still have people who are still defending the criminalization of weed. So we're nowhere near having the conversation on heroin yet. But when we try to, I said, we're often ill-equipped.
I would like to get them off the substances lists and have the states decide whether they want to legalize it or not. If it was up to me, I would legalize it all.
I would go states' rights on it. I would go states'
Yeah,
rights.
but we don't have a monarchy. We have states' rights. We have the 10th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just get it off the federal substances list, finally, as it deserves.
Hell yeah.
I don't know. There could be a debate about whether or not there should be mandatory rehab. But as far as putting heroin addicts in jail or prison,
Well, I don't think jail or prison is helpful. I don't think that's how you rehabilitate an addict. But I don't think that we should, at the same time, encourage or permit the sale and abuse of things like heroin in our communities. In particular, just because things like heroin...
But they're going to get it on the black market, though.
Oh, yeah, they're going to get it on the black market. I'm not saying that we're going to be able to eliminate it, but I'm not saying we should encourage it either. And we shouldn't... I don't think that something like heroin should be permitted to come to the surface market.
But if we don't encourage it, more people will die, though. I mean, we had 68,000 people die in, 2017 over overdoses? Like, and then you got people getting their weed laced and shit. Like, there's a reason why we shouldn't have it on the black market. Like, I don't think if we legalized heroin tomorrow, people would say, "Oh, I'm gonna fucking do heroin because it's legal." I don't believe people would do that.
No, I don't believe that either.
I think it's gonna be much, much safer if it's just regulated by the FDA and just sold by the free market, where it's safer and where it could be sold in much more safer dosages. But putting it on the black market where it's just going to cause more problems and kill more people, I don't know. I understand the safety cautions that everybody has with it, because I get it. Opium is a fucking horrible drug.
Mm-hmm.
But I just honestly don't think putting it on the black market is going to do anybody any good. People are going to get it no matter what. So I just think it's better if we just at least regulated it.
I can see that.
Yeah. But needless to say, the war on drugs is unconstitutional.
Well,
It's always been unconstitutional.
The larger war on drugs is not necessarily, I think, extended because anybody thinks that it's constitutional. Like we know, for example, that in order to prohibit alcohol, the Constitution had to be amended.
Yeah.
And then in order to make alcohol legal again, it had to be amended again.
That was funny, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, you ever notice that there was never a constitutional amendment to ban hemp? So you could argue, to a certain degree, that it's the entire drug legalization program is completely unconstitutional based on the merits that, based on previous precedent, the Constitution recognized that it didn't have the right to ban specific substances, so they had to amend it in order to ban alcohol.
Yeah, even if you take alcohol in a picture, I mean, we did tobacco, we did tobacco, cars, we regulate a lot of things, you know, so...
And I'm not saying that certain things shouldn't be regulated if they're permitted, but we shouldn't be putting people in jail. Like, that doesn't make anybody better, no matter what drug you're addicted to, no matter even if you're selling it. It doesn't make you better to go into jail or to go into prison to deal with these populations. There's no way that anybody goes into prison and comes out of it a better person. You just don't.
No, and I also think we should get rid of
It's just traumatizing.
We should also get rid of the felony system. We should get rid of solitary confinement.
I mean, we should
have mandatory cameras being looked at weekly, monthly, whatever, by higher ups, and it should be mandatory, and there should be certain things that just should not be tolerated.
We should have better prison systems, but we should change the way. If we want to have better prison systems, we need to change the incentive and the way that we're looking at them. The perspective right now
And the
is
private
that,
prison complex.
well, the private prison complex looks at it and says, well, we've got a bunch of people here, and we've got to stick them in these places. We've got to make them uncomfortable, and we've got to make money off of it. And I think that if we looked at it from a completely different perspective, and instead of saying, well, we have we have a captive population that's cheap labor, and use them as slave labor, which is what we do now, if instead we said we have people who are displaying antisocial, deviant kinds of behaviors or be committing crimes and can't be in the rest of society, how can we rehabilitate this person? How can we make them not do that again? And if we can't, we can't. And we need to acknowledge that some people are just not going to do that, and they're not interested in reintegrating with society. But that's a much smaller percentage than the amount of people that we currently have in lockup. Those people that we currently have in lockup, the vast majority of them do not belong there. But now that we have them there, a lot of them have been made worse. A lot of the people who were originally completely innocent of any crime, you can't let back out because they've been hardened by the prison system.
And the felony system.
And the felony system makes it even worse when you get out. And that's the thing, like, the way the felony system exists right now, if you fuck up and you do something dumb as a teenager, you're fucked for the rest of your life, and you can't ever fucking fix that. Even if you go to jail and you serve your time and you manage to get out, you still can't get a job.
Not to mention the time of fair and speedy trial. I mean, we tried to...
A lot of our court systems are just so congested because we have so many ridiculous laws.
Well,
That's a big chunk of it.
97% of people plead guilty.
They take this
They
stuff
don't.
with
97.
these.
Only 3% of Americans go to court. Like, that's not okay.
No, it's because we incentivize people to take these plea deals.
We need to hire more public defenders. We need to find a way where they have actual legit time for all of their defendants, because this is insane. And we need to get rid of victimless crimes.
We need to drastically simplify our legal code.
If I was the president of the United States, first day in office, I would release all victimless crimes.
It's going to be tough though, because
Nah, it wouldn't.
Well,
It would be constitutional.
It would be constitutional to release all people who are arrested, say, for cannabis possession, simple cannabis possession. But when you say victimless crimes, you have to define exactly what crimes are we calling victimless.
I don't even think I need an excuse. I think I just have that power.
No, but you need to define it at least, because otherwise the individual districts will be left to set their own definitions.
Victimless crime. A crime that did not involve actually harming somebody else. I mean, weed possession, carrying a gun, prostitution, gambling. These are all non-victimless crimes. These are victimless crimes.
I knew what you meant, but
yeah. So, as long as you're not harming anybody else, that's a victimless crime. So you get to be released. Like, that's the thing. If people minded their damn business, we wouldn't have the problems we have right now. So, yes. Maybe if you don't like prostitution, then don't buy a prostitute. If you don't like guns, don't get a gun. But you can't stop somebody else's individual liberty because it offends you, because then it never stops. Because what if somebody is offended by you? Then what? Then what? Is the government supposed to make an exception for you? Like, it's just a never-ending cycle of authoritarianism. Like, just leave people alone. So yes, I would release them. Freedom over fear. No, it's funny. I was watching that video with Ben Shapiro with the abortion thing, and how he fucking got triggered and and basically stopped the interview with the BBC guy. I forget the guy's name, but he was a far right winger. Like he advocated for the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, and he was just pretty far right.
Well, a lot of
And
people advocated for the Iraq War because they were fed false information, but a lot of people were deceived by that. That's a long conversation that we haven't laid any of the background to.
well, in Europe they don't. In America, they like powder your balls. Like usually, like when you're getting interviewed, it's somebody who agrees with you already and just is just giving you just wants to like
Softball interviews.
yeah softball interviews. Like but in Europe and stuff, they actually like even if they're on your side, they challenge you. Like
I'm
they
much
play
more
devil's advocate.
And I much more prefer that style of interview. You get much more interesting conversation that way.
You get honest interview. They'll have to see if they know your shit. I mean, or if you know their shit, they know your shit. And if they don't know their shit, it will be easily known.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't. If you're gonna argue for something, you're at least gonna have to know some of the facts.
Right.